Oh, I hate this machine.
You want me to do it?
Okay. Then start video.
Mute.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Can you hear?
Yep.
Yes, aloha.
Aloha. Welcome to the
Aloha.
meeting. Hi. Here's Representative Troy Hashimoto's on as well, convening the meeting today. Today we've got the Hawaii Crisis Standards of Care Triage group talking about the allocation framework. And Dr. Della Lynn, is Dr. Lynn on? Oh,
Yes, I am.
Hi, aloha. To present to us what the allocation framework is and how you came about to it and how you would apply it. So welcome to the Kupuna Caucus.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Murakawa and Representative Hashimoto. So I'm hoping to spend a few minutes kind of talking about the current evolution of this living document, the Hawaii Crisis Standards of Care Triage Allocation Framework, as you mentioned. We all know that we hope this document never needs to be put into practice, and yet it is a significant document. In the past 4 months of our journey, we have said we hope for the best, we plan for the worst, but importantly, we do it together. Before I start sharing some of the pieces of the document, particularly those relevant, I think, to the Kupuna Caucus, I'd like to invite Keali'i Lopez to share a few words. I'm assuming Keali'i doesn't need any introduction to this group. Keali'i, are you on?
Yes, I'm here. Aloha, everyone. I'm Keali'i Lopez, State Director for AARP Hawaii. Just want to provide some context given the agenda referencing AARP's concern about the crisis standards of care. In April of last year, we had sent a letter to the governor because we were concerned about some of the components, critical components of the crisis standards of care, specifically related to the use of age. At this point, I appreciate that the panel led by Dr. Lynn.
No, thanks. I still have my coffee here.
Can you mute yourself, people? Thank you.
Although we all would like to have some coffee, I think. So we wanted to, I really appreciate that Dr. Lynn reached out to AARP and we were able to provide some input on specific components related to age. So part of some of the issues that were in there was it was not added as a factor for consideration like disability and other discrimination issues. The other was that age was used as a tiebreaker, meaning when all things were equal, prognosis and issues, that age was going to be used as a tiebreaker. And then there was some life cycle language. What I appreciate in working with Dr. Lynn and the panel over the last several months is they've worked really hard and actually have had the benefit of almost 2 years of data to help support what they're working on. So we've engaged our national office in review of those components and are pleased that she's going to share with you really good results. So thank you, Dr. Lynn.
Thank you. Can I share my screen? Is that all right, Senator Murakawa? Can I do that? Yes? Is that a yes? I probably should have practiced this beforehand.
Yeah, you're able to do that.
Without making too much of a, okay. All right. Can you guys see that?
10 days was the 26th.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So first I just want to check, are the people in the audience comfortable with what crisis standards of care are? And if not everyone, just so that I might spend a few minutes just to make sure everyone has kind of that same foundational understanding.
Not
Do you want me to do that?
Why don't you go forward with that? Yeah.
Okay, all right. I won't take too long because I want to try to keep this actually brief enough so we can
Can anybody excuse me, anybody who can mute, everybody can mute themselves so that we're getting feedback. So, okay, proceed.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
So like I said, I'm going to keep this brief because I actually would like to try to spend some of the time, if we have time, during the 20-30 minutes, to have some feedback from all of you. So basically, there's a continuum of 3 levels of healthcare that depend on kind of your space, medical supplies, including equipment, and your staff. And so that first level is called conventional. That's the green. That's basically everyday care and normal care. When you get into an emergency, the healthcare system then moves into a second level. And again, it's a continuum, so it can slide back and forth. And there's the far edge and the near edge of some of these, called contingency care. And we have, within Delta and Omicron surges, experienced contingency care here in Hawaii. That's when everyday care is somewhat adjusted. So if some of you remember elective care, some of the elective surgery, even maybe some of your elective annual visits to your doctors got postponed. You remember seeing tents at some of the hospitals because we had to expand being able to use areas. Some of you may be in the neighbor island. You know that some of the bed space was adjusted just to make sure that we were able to take care of everybody. But the actual care, the functional equivalent of care, is the same as the standard conventional care. So now when you hit crisis care, so crisis care is at the far end of the spectrum, and that's when you just don't have enough to meet the needs, even you've exhausted contingency kind of possibilities. And importantly, that's when the focus changes from individual patient care to the need to deliver the best care possible for the population as a whole. So crisis standards of care helps guide decision-making during crisis care. And getting into this crisis care is really not optional. It's something that becomes a forced choice because of the emergent situation. And so when that happens, if you don't have a crisis standard of care kind of algorithm or framework to base your decisions on, you might actually have greater death or injury or illness because you're just kind of making decisions on the fly, or you're bending to advocacy issues and things. Anyway, you're not using the objective kind of criteria. Now, where does this term crisis standards of care come from? It actually comes from the National Academy of Medicine. They first used this term in 2010. And I have the actual definition there. It's a substantial change in usual healthcare operations, like I've just mentioned, and the level of care it is possible to deliver, which is made necessary by either a pervasive, which is kind of where we're in now, this pandemic, or a catastrophic. So it could be something that there's no notice and you get like an earthquake, hurricane, major disaster that could also potentially put your healthcare delivery system in a crisis care situation. As we develop this living document, and you've probably heard, you'll hear me say this very often, living document, because there is no one, it's going to continually evolve depending on any current situation. But we tried to keep 3 goals in mind, a North Star, if you will. We wanted a set of guidelines that would be harmonized across the state. Oops. And that's very, very important. We want to make sure that it was something that every hospital felt comfortable and we wouldn't have a large variation across the state. We wanted to make sure that it was a set of guidelines that were useful to the frontline clinician. That's something that they could actually use in the care of patients. And then a set of guidelines that were clear and specific enough to mitigate what we understand has happened throughout this pandemic, which is the moral injury of having to make very difficult decisions. So it's to support our colleagues, but also importantly to create a harmonization across the state. I will make a mention now that Hawaii is so lucky because the hospitals within our state have all agreed that they will work together with the state agencies to make sure that no one hospital ends up in crisis standards of care alone, that they will collaborate and support each other so that we do this together, and don't leave one hospital out there where they have to struggle by themselves. And I make comment about that because it's not the situation with every single state in this country. So it's something that we should be proud of, that our leaders have made that kind of commitment. So in the overall framework, a key component of this is separating the triage role from the clinical role. And that's essential because we want to make sure that the triage piece is objective. We want to make sure we don't have any conflicts of commitments. And as I mentioned, we want to minimize the moral distress and burnout for our clinicians. So what has happened since September, October? Really, they should say October, not September, because we kind of began in October, and it's been about 4 months now that we have been meeting. So we've been going through a rigorous review with our subgroup of volunteers. Our subgroup is made up of 11 people. About half of them were part of the original authorship group, and we've expanded that representation. I'll go through the right-hand side in a moment, but on the left-hand side, you'll see that some of this was actually input from some of you. The subgroup now has a geriatrician in it, a primary care physician who actually has a very large geriatrics practice. You see the folks on the bottom part, their emergency room and neighbor island, pediatrics, intensive care, palliative care, ethics experience, patient safety, surgical care. That's just some of the backgrounds of some of the folks. Again, all volunteer. But importantly, we also added a non-clinician voice because we realized that in the end, this document needs to serve the community, and we needed to have a non-clinician voice early in our discussion and not later. And I know some of my subgroup members are here, but I know specifically the non-clinician, which is Rich Willoughby, who was so graciously gave us time during this, is on. And I did ask him because of his role, if he could speak for just a couple minutes to reflect on being part of these deliberations and recommendations and discussions. Rich, are you on?
Yes. Hello, everybody. This is Rich Willoughby, and I'm the non-clinician. I'll take just a few minutes and give you a little bit of a background of how I got to this point of being on the CSC subgroup, and then a few quick reflections. I'll be 73 in June. I have 4 grandkids, 2 here on Oahu, and I've been retired about 3 years. This all started with PFAC, which is the Patient Family Advisory Council at Queens. For those of you who aren't aware of what that is, it's a small group, about 12, 15 people from the general community that meet with the principals once a month, the principals from Queens once a month, to discuss issues that directly affect the patients and the patients' families. It is quite a remarkable group. I was asked to represent the CSC subgroup as a representative of PFAC. The thought behind it was to put somebody who wasn't a clinician onto this committee to give a non-medical point of view to the document. Now, a couple of reflections. This subgroup brought together a vast knowledge base that tackled some really difficult technical and ethical questions that involve crisis situations here within our state. Many of these questions that were brought up require medical knowledge, common sense, and wisdom to come to a satisfactory answer. During a crisis, tough decisions have to be made and implemented very quickly for the good of the entire community. And this group spent hours and hours discussing and putting some serious thought into what this CSC document was going to address. Being the only person on the committee who wasn't a doctor, I felt that my point of view was always heard and was respected. As that non-medical person, my greatest takeaway was watching the evolution of individuals' viewpoints as we started discussing some of these things. In some cases, people changed 180 degrees their point of view as we would go through a lengthy discussion on a specific topic. But in the end, we came to a consensus, and we, I think, achieved a document for the betterment of our entire community. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rich. And just briefly there on the right-hand side, to share some of the things that we did in the last 4 months. So we did reach out to our frontline clinicians in Hawaii as we were doing this review. You know, by this time, we've had more than a year's worth of additional information. We'd been through the Delta surge. We wanted to know how the framework had worked so far, what needed adjustment, what needed clarification, what could be validated in terms of what was in it as well. And we also went nationally. So we talked to frontline clinicians. I'm sure I'm not going to remember all the states, but if I think about it, Oregon, Alaska, Tennessee, Massachusetts, North Carolina, California. So frontline clinicians from many different places, Illinois. And we also reviewed policies. You know, everybody was kind of going through the same situation of changing and evolving and learning from the last year and how this document should look. The National Academy of Medicine had a 10-week workshop series, bringing together a lot of people that had been reviewing things, including ethicists and clinicians and advocates, people in advocacy roles and community roles. Some of the state policies we looked at Minnesota's, which has been longstanding. They're one of the ones that have had some sort of crisis standards of care document for years, going back to about 2010, I think. Colorado, North Carolina, Arizona, Oregon again, Washington, state of Washington, Pennsylvania, again, one of the states that has had a longstanding document, but constantly in evolution. And Massachusetts. You see there that we went to the Hastings Center, which is a national ethicists, portal or holding space for ethicists to opine on various issues. Went to them regularly to get information. And we actually contacted HHS Office of Civil Rights. And so we had a conversation with them to get information from them. We extended our perspectives with other clinical ethicists, people in elder law ministry. KLEE has been very helpful, and we've gone to a couple of community organizations to get some of their feedback on where we are right now. So that's just an example, and as Rich mentioned, really probably thousands of hours of conversation. I'm going to share with you kind of the factual pieces now that I think are most important for Kupuna Caucus. Let's see here. I think there's like 4 things that I want to share with you. So this picture is something I grabbed from the CDC public health law presentation, but it kind of just sets the tone. I mean, we never want to be in this situation where we have not enough to take care of everybody in our community. But this is the planning for the worst situation, where in this case, 12 people with 12 totally different walks of life, but needing that one ventilator. How do we make that decision? How do we make that decision fairly, equitably? How do we make it so in the end, we don't choose the person who actually is going to die. I mean, the last thing we want to do is make choices so then the person on the ventilator dies and everybody else dies as well. That would have not served our community at all. So it is a heart-wrenching kind of situation. It's really nothing that we as clinicians are trained for. We're trained to take care of the patient in front of us, do everything possible for that patient in front of us. We're not really trained to flip and think about the whole population as a whole and think about things like crisis care, because fortunately it's not something that we live in. So that therein comes some of the challenges and the I think the time and effort we've taken to try to make what we think are fair decisions here. So one thing is with this living document evolution, we wanted it to be a general approach. We thought that the previous one had too many pieces of COVID embedded into it, and eventually we were going to emerge from COVID, and we needed to make sure that that this was a document that as it lived on, it could live on and didn't need to be completely taken apart after COVID was perhaps not in our front dashboard. So the general approach has some very significant statements. One is that there are no categorical exclusions. And I know that Kaylee mentioned this about us not having age originally in that list, but the age is in that list because there are going to be no categorical exclusions, and that the language in the black there is the language that is what we're recommending in the document. So no patient will be categorically excluded from eligibility of critical resources based on age, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability status, English proficiency, perceptions of societal worth, immigration status, religion, insurance status, socioeconomic, and housing status. In that same venue, then, that patients will be evaluated through individualized assessment, and everything will be based on best available objective medical evidence. And so I think that that's important. I will note that the reason I put those two parts in blue are those are also language that is recommended by the Office of Civil Rights. And they know that these are pieces in our document that we're recommending. And as far as the objective medical evidence, the tool we are using now is the best objective tool in our recommendation after review to date. It wasn't a tool made for COVID. It was actually an intensive care, or is an intensive care tool currently used and has been used since about 2001. So has over 20 years of experience using it. And sorry about that. I should have put my phone on mute. So that will continue to be used. We also went back to our clinicians to make sure that when they have had to use it with the previous surges, whether or not it seemed to validate, and we got feedback from them that they felt comfortable with it. So those two things, as well as reviewing all the literature, balancing it, as nothing's ever black and white, as we learned in these reviews. We are maintaining the SOFA score, which is what most of the different other states have done as well. The other objective piece is hospital survivability, and we're stressing that on that objective level. Then there comes the question about, well, what about a chronic medical condition that might affect survivability of hospitalization? We actually don't use the word tiebreaker anymore. We're using the objective level, which is our primary focus. We hope most patients will be able to be, most decisions will be able to be made at that level, is called Tier 1. Tier 2 are factors for the triage committee to consider if for some reason after Tier 1, they are not able to completely match up the resources. So chronic medical conditions in particular had some concerns for people who are older, saying, well, if I'm older, I may have more chronic medical conditions. So we wanted to be very clear. And there's actually 3 places in the document now that we're recommending that there's actually an example to try to clarify our thinking. So in particular for chronic medical conditions, we're saying that this is not a categorical age exclusion criteria. And then we go on with an example, because there we talk about, let's say you have a 40-year-old and a 75-year-old, and they both have similar hospitalization survival predictions. We then need to go to more disease-specific prediction models so that we can, again, make sure that if there's only one ventilator, that we have one person who can survive and we don't end up with 2 people who have not survived. So in the case of a 40-year-old and a 75-year-old, imagine that the 75-year-old had no comorbidities, meaning no chronic medical conditions. And then you have a 40-year-old with end-stage liver disease. The Child-Pugh score is something that we use as a predictive score for liver disease. And if that were the situation, the 75-year-old would actually get the consideration of the ventilator over the 40-year-old, because in that situation, that chronic condition is with the 40-year-old. And then similarly, if the 40-year-old had no chronic conditions, but the 75-year-old had metastatic pancreatic cancer, the triage committee might put that into factor as a predictive disease-specific prediction model and say, we would likely give the ventilator to the 40-year-old. And again, we've had the chance to talk with the Office of Civil Rights with these examples. And so they are aware that we're putting these examples into our document. The second piece is what about COVID specifically? Now, as I said, this will now be sort of an addendum after the main part of the document. But I want to speak about it now because there is that question came up before, and so I want to address that. So with COVID specifically, again, as with everything, we're going to use objective medical evidence. And this is the second place where we're using a patient example to try to clarify our thinking. So imagine you have somebody who was previously healthy and 79 years old and now in the intensive care unit for pneumonia. This person does not have COVID pneumonia, but has pneumonia and needs a ventilator. At the same time, you have a previously healthy 66-year-old with COVID, also respiratory failure and needs a ventilator, and there's only one ventilator. What our science, even up to today, so again, we got to review the most recent, up through February, so we had a whole nother year and a half's worth of data. It is a strong signal that if you have COVID-19 and you're increasing age, particularly if you're over the age of 65, that it carries a very poor prognosis. And so in this example, if the triage team were to review this and had only one ventilator and they wanted to use objective medical evidence, they would likely determine that the 79-year-old without COVID should receive the ventilator, as that patient is more likely to survive. Once again, we don't want to make a decision where we end up with 2 people who have not survived. Now, if we ever get into a situation where we have no objective medical evidence to help us decide, then it is in fact a random lottery. It is then in fact just pick a number and we hope that the person who gets the ventilator survives. But as much as possible, when we can use objective medical evidence, we want to use that to be able to save the most number of people. I want to share the third clinical example. This is not for the elderly, but I think maybe this group would still be interested, and I wanted to share it with you because it is, again, an example. So we want to make sure that even though we're using objective instruments aren't infallible. And so we have a statement that says reasonable modifications to the use of clinical instruments, these are the objective instruments, for assessing short-term survival should be made when necessary for accurate use with patients with underlying disabilities. You notice this is blue again, and it's blue again because this is, again, in conversation with the Office of Civil Rights And this is actually the language that they suggest using. So we have not tried to wordsmith, we're just using what they have recommended. This is the example, and I'll talk you through the example. There's something called the Glasgow Coma Scale, which is a scale we use to look at prediction of neurologic severity, brain injury severity. And it's one of the subscales within that objective SOFA score that I talked about earlier. One of the things in there is whether or not you can verbalize. And the problem then is if you have a patient who at baseline has a disability where they cannot, they have a speech disability, so they cannot speak, that person should not be penalized under these circumstances for not being able to speak, because that's their baseline. So it is a specific example where we articulate so that clinicians understand to keep in mind that if somebody has a pre-existing disability, they shouldn't be penalized in using the objective score of SOFA in predicting that patient's survivability. And this particular example is given. Again, the wording here we've actually taken from the Office of Civil Rights because we actually like that wording, and that's what's in our document. So that's the third clinical example that we have in the document. The final thing I want to mention is the concept of life cycle and life innings, which Kate Lee also mentioned. In our earlier version, we addressed life cycle and life innings. In our current recommended version, we are recommending it not to be included as a factor. I'll say that many ethicists have written about it in support. And in fact, some states still have life cycle in their crisis standards of care plans. The concept is basically that every person deserves the chance to experience the various innings of life, if you will. They need to have the ability to experience childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, middle adult, advanced age. And then although one would argue that all people stand to lose the same thing if they die, right? The rest of their lives. These ethicists are arguing that in the way that a society distributes resources over a lifespan, the younger person will have not yet received as much distributed resources, will not yet have had a chance to live their whole life. And so they should be afforded a priority. In the end, in our discussions, we believe that this decision is personal and cultural. And so we cannot speak for the whole community, and therefore our recommendation for the Hawaii Crisis Standards of Care in this current version is that this is outside of this document's purview, and that if someone wishes to make that charitable decision, that in a crisis situation, they would want to forego treatment and allow someone much younger to be treated, then that needs to be an informed refusal that they need to have written down. And that would need to really remain as a personal choice. So that if there's somebody out there listening right now who says, no, I really would want that, I would advise you that that would be something you should have written down so that we, as your clinicians, would be able to honor that, but not assume that it would be a blanket approach to everybody in the community. So we do not have that. So again, I'm kind of go back to what we started off with, was we hope for the best, we plan for the worst, and we want to do it together. I want to emphasize some take-home points that we want to make, that this plan does not, or this framework does not take your physicians away from your care. The bedside clinician is staying that patient's advocate. Again, all the hospitals in the state of Hawaii have agreed to the triage allocation plan if we're in a crisis care situation making difficult decisions. So patients and families should know and be reassured that the decisions and care that they will receive will not differ between hospitals. And it is intended that no one system alone reaches a crisis situation. That all people, in fact, each person deserves compassion and dignity, respect, compassion, and dignity. I completely feel that very strongly about that. And to maybe use this, since we're coming off of a surge right now, to think about how we can prepare, which is that if you're out there and you don't have your medical wishes written down, that you haven't talked to your doctor about it, or you haven't talked to your family about it. It doesn't matter whether you're sick or you're healthy. Even if you're healthy, as we've known with COVID, it doesn't necessarily only hit the people who are very, very sick. Every person should talk with their family and doctors about what matters most to them and their medical wishes. Write these wishes down, including who should be your voice if you're unable to be that your own voice, who that should be. Make sure they understand that these are your wishes, not their wishes. And if you are one of those who feels that the life inning should be in place for you, help us by articulating that. I would conclude by saying again, I've tried to be kind of factual about what I think the Kupuna Caucus is interested in, but I want to tell you that every single decision and recommendation that we are making has been really with the desire to be fair and equitable, and to really look at it at all angles. There have been hours of discussion. Some of them have been really emotionally trying, if not exhausting. But I think we all also realized that they were necessary. No decision was made in a vacuum. These are very, very difficult decisions. And please, again, recognize that this is a living document and we want your feedback as well. It's something that will continually evolve. And before I hand it back to Senator Morikawa and Representative Hashimoto, I'd like to hand it back to KLE for her reflections and comments.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. I was remiss in also making clear that it wasn't just ARP that raised the concern previously. The Kupuna Council as well as PABIA addressed this because it's, again, a broad issue. One of the things that I think is important is that this document, I believe, is really just so well written, and I appreciate having been a very small part of review of it. But it really is intended to hopefully not have to be utilized. The fact that Hawaii has it in place is a good thing. I think we all support physicians and healthcare providers. And the fact that anyone has to be put in a position of having to make a really difficult decision of basically who gets to survive and who doesn't is a challenging thing. So very much appreciate the effort that's gone into this. But one of the reasons this is important and why it became a little bit of a big issue was the fact that the governor's proclamation provided a waiver of liability to physicians and facilities, provided they complied with these crisis standards of care. And I think that's important that they have that waiver, and that this is a much more effective crisis standard of care that hopefully, as you all get a chance to look at it, can provide some feedback. I think the group's been really very open to hearing and recognizing that the way Hawaii looks at things may be different than, say, somewhere else. And so we're looking forward to continue working with Dr. Lin and the panel as needed, and appreciate the work that they've done. And thank you, Senator Moriwaki and Rep. Hashimoto.
Thank you, Kelly. Are there any questions for Dr. Lin or for Richard Willoughby? I see Donald Sakamoto's hand up for quite a while. Donald, do you have a question?
Yes, Senator, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for the presentation and allowing me to speak. I just want to ask the presenters, as a disabled senior in his early 60s who is blind, what groups of disabled communities have you outreached to get feedback about this particular subject?
Yeah, well, we're open to a good question, and we're open to all community input. right now it's been the Disabilities Development Division at DOH that has taken a look at it and reviewed it and given us feedback.
Okay, so can I contact you and give my opinions?
Yes, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Dr. Lin, do you want to put in a chat box or say it out where people can get a copy of your report and also where they can give you feedback?
Well, I can do that. I can't give the report because the report right now, or this document, is going to DOH and HAH for them to do the vetting. So it's not finalized. I mean, so unfortunately, it's not at that point. But hopefully, I mean, it's there. So I would hope that in the next few weeks, I think the
And it would be-
legislative session has distracted folks from it, but I would hope that in the next few weeks we would do that. And what we plan to do, if you can send me Donald's email, I can reach out to him. I think what has been suggested is if there's some sort of a generalized portal so that when it comes out, because I don't know, I mean, I helped to bring these 10 other colleagues of mine together, but I don't know that I'm going to be the person to be forever the person to be contacting. So I don't want to not answer anybody's questions. So if somebody has something, but just to know that we haven't quite set that up in terms of what that central place will be ongoing in terms of that conversation.
So is the Developmental Disabilities Division the agency that is coordinating this on behalf of the state? Is that what the
No, because it's no, it would be Department of Health in general. It wouldn't be, we just reached out to them because we wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything that looked outright not, that seemed discrimination or just not fair to them. I would also mention to Donald that I suppose the other group we went to was the Office of Civil Rights, which obviously has a definite viewpoint towards not just people of older age, but disabilities. I mean, that's part of the OCR's work, right?
Okay, I see Jim Peach. Jim, hi. Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Okay. We can't hear you still.
Okay.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Senator, for convening this very important meeting, and thank you, Della, for not just recently, but for over the years of being very patient with me, because as you know, I'm an advocate for the elderly, and I just wanted to not to ask you what's in the final report because it hasn't been vetted, et cetera, but is age still going to be used as a tiebreaker?
So first, we don't have tiebreakers. There is a level 2 factor. There is, in the main document, there is no category, so nobody will be categorically excluded because you are at any age, whether it's over the age of 65, happen to fall into the bracket of 40 to 50, or under the age of whatever. So age is no longer a categorical exclusion at all. So I think actually, Jim, you and I had a chance to have a conversation before, and you mentioned that piece, and I think you were one of the early people to tell me, go talk to the Office of Civil Rights. So we've done that, and so there is no, only if there is some sort of a scientific objective medical evidence that would tell us that somebody of any age. So I'll give you an example. If something would say that everybody, let's say we had some strange disease where everybody who happened to be the age of 25 are just going to die. I'm just making that up, of course, but we wouldn't want to put a 25-year-old on a ventilator knowing that person is going to die, right? So if we had absolute objective medical evidence. So in that vein, what we did continue to say, because we looked at the COVID specific literature, is that with COVID, not with all other medical problems, but with COVID, increasing age had a definite signal that advancing age carried poor prognosis. So that's really more, that's the place where that lives as objective medical evidence.
And then just technically, in your FAQs, previous FAQs, there was indications of the anti-discrimination statutes. And I'm just hoping that the age discrimination statute will also be listed along with the disability and other discrimination statutes that were mentioned when whoever it was responding to questions about age and disability. And it was very clear that, yes, there are anti-discrimination laws and Americans with Disabilities, et cetera, but there is also that specific age discrimination statute that DHHS has too.
I'm pretty sure that was re-looked at, but
Okay.
if you can send me that particular one, just so I can make a tickler in my head to go back and look to make sure I know that FAQ was reworked as we were clear on the categorical exclusions not being present. So I think that was taken care of, but if you could send me your information, then I can make doubly sure.
And then one final question is I know it's not your Kuliana, but it seems rather difficult for people to find these crisis standards of care on the Department of Health's website. It's not on their COVID page, easily discoverable. I did eventually find it each time, and I forgot each time how to look for it. But it may be useful to just have a little tab there because there's so many people interested in this area. And one final thing, it's a compliment. You reached out to me. I valued your experience over the years, and I thank you so much for taking the time with me. And I'm hard not to crack when it comes to saying okay on certain things. But I think if it evolves the way that you are indicating, that it's all passed through all the other levels for distribution. You've done a marvelous job, and I know how much time you've put into this, and you need to get back to your regular job eventually. But thank you very, very much for your leadership in this.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. And John McDermott.
Hi, I had a question about the slide regarding the 66-year-old versus the 79-year-old, because you said that age isn't a consideration, and it sounds like it is. It sounds like the way I read that, it says data suggests that if you're over 65 and this person is only over by 1 year, that catching COVID, you're in a lot of trouble. So that, I don't know if you're talking about national data or you're talking about Hawaii data, because I think they would be different. But also, I mean, somebody who is 66 and maybe never smoked, exercises, didn't drink. When you're talking about national data for people who died of COVID and were over 65, that includes the smokers and the drinkers and the people who kind of abuse their bodies. And so I'm not comfortable with using data. I would rather that you're looking at the person. The 66-year-old person has been healthy all his life, but because he's 1 year over this national data, we're going to just let him go. By the way, I am in my 60s, but that has nothing to do with this.
I am too. So, so just to clarify again, remember everybody is going to have individual assessment. So it's only when you get to a point where you have to make certain, so that COVID piece is national data. We don't actually have Hawaii data, but what we had a year and a half ago was China data and Italy data. So now we have broad US data across the entire United States with 64 ICUs. So that's, and there have been actually several other, I'm thinking of one study in particular, but study after study after study. What we have in Hawaii is more anecdotal data because nobody's done an actual study. So nothing in our Hawaii data would conflict with what we see in more robust scientific data. And some of these have actually used fairly advanced augmented intelligence algorithms to try to figure this out. Now, it's not 65 in particular. The actual wording is that, and what we actually see as a signal is advancing age. To tell you the truth, a lot of it even by the time you're 50 and older, but the signal gets stronger and stronger when you hit 65, 75, and 85. And so what that example tries to explain to folks is that this is a factor to take into consideration. And I will say that this was an exact example that I shared at the Office of Civil Rights, because I knew they have a very attuned sensitivity to make sure nothing seems like ageism. And they actually approved that example as a good way to explain how scientific evidence is being used. So that's our recommendation so far. I hear what you're saying. I'm just trying to clarify where we're coming from. I see there's something in the chat. Oops, go ahead, Rich.
Yeah. What may help clarify this a little bit is that 66-year-old has not just gotten COVID. That 66-year-old is at the point of death with COVID and needs the ventilator. It's not the healthy 66-year-old who took care of himself and everything and just got COVID, so we're not going to treat him. It's the individual who's on his deathbed and we're trying to figure out whether he needs the ventilator or not.
Thank you, Rich, for that clarification. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you.
I see something in, maybe this is in the direct chat.
You see
somebody's asking, I guess it was a direct question to me about whether when it's actually initiated. So I didn't actually cover it, but you're right. It's when it's actually an emergency. It has to be an emergency declaration, has to be a proclamation from the governor, and our resources are tight. So it has to be two. It has to be kind of a double prong trigger.
Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. So is the report, just one more question, is the report going to have, say, the standards of what is medical evidence that you would look at, so it's kind of consistently applied when a patient comes in asking or needing ventilators, or, in terms of survivability, all of those, are there going to be some standards going to be developed?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding. So I'm going to answer it two ways because I'm not sure if I understand your question. One answer is that there is references. So there will be references. And so if something changes, if we learn something different, if it's COVID, we're still in COVID and it's a COVID situation, and we learn something different, that will have to be amended, right? But that's the beauty of having kind of a main document that has no categorical, has that main document that can kind of be a little bit more longstanding. As far as the actual tool, yes, the document has like different tools for people to use. And we've actually asked some of our clinicians, are these usable when you have a crisis? Because you can't have something that's so tedious that it takes, let's say, half an hour to fill out, right, per patient. You don't have that kind. You need something that is useful in this workflow of a crisis situation where you've got not enough resources for things. So far that seems to be working, and so that, yes, there are not only a common table, but we've also attached some tools so people can, in some of the hospitals who may not have one, could download that and say, okay, that's what we're going to use. Others may take something and then adapt it a little bit for their particular hospital because they have a specific electronic health record or something like that they have to merge it with. And so they can put it in context. But again, the idea is that I can be in Maui, I could be in Hilo, I could be in west side of Kauai. I could be at Castle, I could be at Queens, I could be at HPH. And frankly, we actually also invited Tripler into this conversations because we wanted to be consistent, even though they're not necessarily held under those same kind of state rules, but we just wanted to make sure there was harmonization. And everybody is on board in terms of saying we are going to use this harmonized document. So that was important because recognize we have some hospitals here in Hawaii, like Castle and Kaiser, who have affiliations nationally. And so we needed to make sure that the document was something that everybody could and would use. The liability question that Keali'i mentioned, that waiver works both ways. The way it works, I think, for harmonization is it means if somebody decides to just go off on their own and just like not follow them at all, well, then they're not going to be covered. So it puts some teeth into making sure that this harmonization isn't just on paper alone. There is a reason to follow it.
Okay, I see Donald Sakamoto. Donald, you have another question?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Question is about people coming from out of state, let's say tourists, say overseas. Are the documents in alternative format for Japanese, Korean, etc., European languages?
Yeah, so the document actually is really for the clinicians. It's for the hospital to put in place. Our transparency is sharing it with the public so everybody sees. What we anticipate is some sort of public messaging or maybe a flyer or something that would give some brief information, but we wouldn't expect for an individual to read the whole thing. So currently, I'm not aware of any state that has done that because that's not the intent of the document. Any public messaging should, as you're saying, be something that could be accessible to anybody speaking any language. And we'll have to work on that. I'm not sure all the pieces, but that's important. Does that help answer your question, Don?
Well, one more, well, it just it comes down to I believe it's Title VI. When documents are provided either on a website, they should be in different languages to change them. So I just wonder if that's possible. You're going to do that.
So I'm not DOH, so I don't have the answer to that. So.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Dr. Lin and Richard Willoughby for presenting. Thank you, Kaylee, for bringing them to us. I think we really learned a lot, and gee, we went through the whole hour. So there's a lot.
I didn't expect that. So you didn't get to do your legislative update. Sorry about that.
We're gonna do that real quickly now. But thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and all you've been doing and your leadership in this area. So mahalo.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for the comments, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go quickly on the bills that we have. We're doing quite well, actually very well. All of the bills that we have, you'll see them. If not both, in both houses, at least in one house, the bill is alive. So I'm going to quickly go through HB 1824, which has to do with the Office of Long-Term Care Ombudsman. That House bill is alive. It's blanked out the appropriation, the positions, but we're going to push for the 5 positions that we had in the original bill that we all discussed. SB 2677, the long-term care rental assistance pilot program, that is alive in the Senate. And this is the Hawaii Public Housing Authority administered bill. SB 2678, which is the Hawaii State Health Insurance Assistance Program, that is alive in the Senate. All of these are crossing over to the other house. Senate Bill 2679, the driver's license bill is both alive in the Senate and in the House. SB 2679 and HB 1822. So you'll have to follow both of those. And as well as SB 2680, and HB 1823, which is the medical aid and dying bills. I think the House bill added physician assistants in addition to the APRN, and we can discuss these bills, but let me just go through all of them since we're running out of time. SB 2461 is the Healthy Aging Partnership Program. That is still alive in the Senate. SB 2678, the State Health Insurance Assistance Program is alive in the Senate. The driver's license renewal, 4-year renewal is alive in both the Senate, SB 2679 and HB 1822, both alive. And let's see. SB 2680, oh wait, I did that already, sorry. SB 3120 and HB 1553 are the Office of Healthcare Assurance lifting the ceiling on their special fund. Both of those are alive. And finally, the Kupuna Caregivers Program, SB 3113, is alive in the Senate. So I know I went through that pretty quickly, but you've got that there. If there are any questions on the bills at all, some of them have changed, not really drastically, but I think all of them are alive in some form that we like. Representative Hashimoto, would you like to say something about the bills or any questions, anybody?
No, I think we're just in a really good position. I think most of our bills are still alive. I think we worked hard on a lot of them, especially our Care Our Choice, to get into a good position. I think also the Kupuna driver's license, we're in a really good position. So it's just halfway. So we will continue pushing, but our Care Our Choice is the only one that's going to move to the Senate, and it's now going to be to the Senate to kind of figure out. Granted, we passed it on third reading on Tuesday.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's a lot of hard work on everybody's part. So if everybody can follow the bills along, we'll try to let you know where they are. But testimonies are really important. Strong, passionate testimony will help. But we want to keep them alive, and hopefully
Senator?
one of the two will. Yes, Barbara. Or Debbie. Is it Debbie or Barbara?
Yeah, it's Debbie.
Oh, Debbie.
So bills, I know the deadline tonight for decking is 8 o'clock. And some of the status for the bills, like Senate Bill 3113, says it's amended in WHAM, but we haven't seen the next draft or the committee report coming out of WHAM. Should we be concerned?
No. It's going to come out. We just had hundreds of bills, so they're all being, I've been watching for them, but they've all been, we're writing committee reports, and so it will come out. It'll all come out today, but I don't think that there's any real problems. And again, they came out pretty much. WHAM didn't change too much. We blanked appropriations and positions, but it's still alive, and it's I think they're all in good shape. Yeah, Barbara.
Hi, Senator, what about Hawaii retirement savings?
We did not see that bill. I don't know. Troy, on your side?
I think Audrey gave an update that it's still alive. So
Yes.
the Senate side.
Audrey, do you have some information?
I
on
can't
that?
guarantee if it's still alive, if it'll be continue to be alive in the House, but we'll try.
Audrey.
Do your best. Yes, it is still alive. It did get reported out. It's SD2 from WHAM.
Okay. What was that number? What was the number on that?
SB 3289, and now it's SD2.
Okay. All right. So
Thank
let's
you.
add that to our list. Okay, anything else? Anybody else? Okay, let me just see if there's anything in chat that's related to the bills. Oh, filing deadline tonight. Okay, the retirement savings 3289. Thank you, Audrey. Okay, so I think we're in good shape. We'll see you on April Fool's Day for the next meeting. Oh, Donald Sakamoto, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just want to ask if something can be put on next time, maybe a next discussion. In 2013, 2014, I worked with the Executive Office of Honolulu. I believe Philip Anna is still there, on a mobility task force for Kapunas for elderly, for neighbor islands, for transportation, especially with the baby boomers. They crafted a bill in 2015. It did not pass, and was reintroduced in 2016. Was not passed. All that money was effort, and all the people that participate from the different islands, as well as the Senator Suzanne Chan Oakland, Representative Cindy Evans, are now gone. And I did participate. So I would like to work with you, Senator, by giving you the mobility task force in the email, as well as a former bill that was introduced.
Okay,
So
we'll
we can
check
work
up
on
on that. Okay.
Thank you.
Then we'll ask EOA what they've been doing or following on that. Anything else, anyone? Okay, well, thank you all very much. Have a good weekend. We will see you April 1st.